Welcome to the Oh Brother podcast. I'm your host, Dan Smith, and alongside me, as always, is my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith. What do you say, Mike?
I say, oh brother.
Well, we're excited to kick off another episode here. We've got a really good one here for you. And before we get into that, in case you guys aren't currently following us, make sure that you do. You can find us at OB Podcast, and we are on Instagram and Twitter. Also, you can drop us a line at obpodcast@gmail.com. And if you're so inclined, you can even call and drop us a line at 407-476-8781. Leave us a brief message, and we may even feature you on a future episode. All right, so Mike, why don't you set up the episode and what our topic is for today?
Well, today, you had teased this out a little bit on social media, we're going to talk about the three Jokers from the movies. Before we get into the topic, and this isn't a comic book podcast, and I'll leave that to Kevin Smith and his crew. I think I got to set it up as far as, where the Joker came from, some of the history.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the origin of the Joker?
Exactly, where the Joker come from. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty interesting how it relates to the different films. First off is, who created the Joker? And you probably didn't know this. This is controversial. Everybody knows Bob Kane probably from Batman.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And, everybody knows that the Joker is kind of the biggest villain in the Batman world, or the most popular, I would say. Bob Kane was not a big fan of sharing credit for his characters. For a long time, he just said, I created the Joker. Nobody else did. But the truth of the matter is, there's two other guys that claim credit for the Joker. One named Bill Finger, mm-hmm. who worked with Bob Kane, and another kid, he's kind of like a high school kid that was working with Bob Kane too, Jerry Robinson. Eventually, Bob Kane admitted Bill Finger was kind of the influence to the Joker, but still to his death, he claimed that Jerry Robinson had nothing to do with it. So that's kind of who came up with the Joker. Now, when you look it up, it'll say Bob Kane and Bill Finger, usually. Some places will add Robinson. Bill Finger being the main guy, and he showed Bob Kane this picture from a movie called The Man Who Laughs. That was in 1928, starring this really Joker-looking guy called Conrad Veidt.
Right.
And, if you look up that name or that movie, you'll see his picture. The guy looks just, without makeup. He's got this long jaw and these crazy teeth, and he kind of looks like the Joker.
He very much looks like the sort of Jack Napier.
Yeah.
When I look at his photo, that's what I see.
I'm like, if I saw that guy on the street, I'd be like, that dude is the Joker. I don't want to cover the comics, like I said. There's a lot of different iterations and different backstories to the Joker. We'll get into that with the movies. Before we start with the movies, I do want to shout out to the 60s TV show that, was kind of my era a little bit. I was a little young, but, still it was very popular when I was a kid. And I'm shocked it only ran for a couple of years because it was so big in the 60s, mm-hmm. the Batman TV show.
Yeah.
Burt Ward is Robin, and who played Batman?
The late, great Adam West.
Adam West, who we just lost.
Right.
And the Joker was played by Cesar Romero. And he played this real sinister, if you remember. I'm sure most people have seen the 60s TV show.
The Joker who refused to shave his mustache.
Exactly. Which some people don't even realize. You kind of got to look close because he did a pretty good job of painting over it. But he refused. He was stubborn as hell. They wanted him to paint it. Frank Sinatra wanted that gig, but they wound up giving it to Cesar Romero, and they were both pretty good actors at the time and pretty well known. So I thought that was an interesting tidbit. Finally got to mention what most people think is the Joker, because he just does a fantastic voice, which is Mark Hamill.
In the comic world, you're talking.
In the comic world.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And Luke Skywalker is the Joker. And most of you probably know that, but I know when I found it out, I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned that it was Mark Hamill. Because of his work as the Joker, he's got all sorts of, voiceover work now. So good for him. And that leads us pretty much to our first movie, Batman, which is...
We've got 3 film iterations of the Joker. We're going to just go in order, although we may jump around, but so we're starting off, of course, with Nicholson's classic Joker from the 1989 film Batman.
So 1989 is when Batman.
Now, I of course, the iconic cover and poster for that movie, just the symbol, right? The Batman symbol.
Yes.
With the stark black and the kind of fiery gold and orange in the background. And I had that shirt until it literally ripped apart and I couldn't wear it anymore. But I bought that shirt, I think, at Caldor's, which nobody's probably ever heard of. I stood in line to see that film back in...
I did too.
Did you? Yeah, and this was at the Showcase Cinemas.
I saw it the night before it opened.
Okay.
You know how they did those midnight shows?
Right, yep.
But I was so excited. And at the time, the Batman trailer, which is basically, when you say trailer, I remember when I was little and somebody said, oh yeah, the trailer's coming to, the theater. I was like, what, are they going to have a trailer with the picture of the movie? I didn't get it. I didn't know trailer meant like commercial for the movie.
Right.
But Batman was such a popular trailer that people would go to the movie that was showing, they'd call the movies and say, hey, what are the previews? When you go to the movies, they show you previews.
Yeah.
People would say, what are the previews? And if Batman was the preview, they'd go, watch the trailer, and then walk out. Now, that happens now with big movies, but I think Batman was the first time that ever happened.
We talked a little bit about this before the episode. I had to go back and watch Joker, and I watched that from start to finish last night. Feel good movie of the year. That's sarcasm. And I said to you a few days ago, I said, I've got the other 2 burned in my brain. It's like part of my DNA. I've seen those so many times. But I went ahead and I put on Dark Knight and I kind of sort of forwarded through the Joker bits, and then I did the same thing with Batman and kind of, because I just wanted to sort of go back and have them all real as fresh as I could, because I knew we'd be talking about the arc of the character as it was portrayed by all 3 of these actors that we'll talk about, and maybe we end up getting into who's your favorite, which actually we have a poll that's out on Twitter, and by the time that we publish this episode, we'll probably have the results of that. But so before
we totally get into it.
Yeah.
Because I was just talking about the trailer. Right. I just want to mention how the trailer focused on Batman, really.
Mm-hmm.
There was only like 3 tidbits of Nicholson, and they were all classic. But, the big thing was where Michael Keaton, gets the villain at the very beginning, and Michael Keaton gives that Batman,
Right.
which sets off all 3, movies a little bit. But there wasn't much of the Joker, which I think, Tim Burton, of course, did the first one. I love the reveal in the movie. Actually, the first 2, the reveals are great. When's the first time we see the Joker?
You talking about Batman?
No, I'm talking about 1989 in the Nicholson. What's the reveal? How does Tim Burton reveal Joker?
I guess that it depends on how you define that, because of course I'm thinking about the scene where he goes to I don't know, was he a doctor of some kind? That wasn't the full reveal, but that was the beginning of it, I guess.
Well, yeah, that was the setup to the reveal, because all we saw was the back of his head, and he breaks the mirror when he looks at himself, and he starts that almost Cesar Romero hysterical laugh.
It's ultimately when he comes in and confronts Jack Palance.
And that's the way you reveal a character. What a brilliant way to introduce the character.
They're so different. I found it interesting that this one, we don't really, there is a little backstory in this one to his character, but not to the extent, certainly not to the extent that there is obviously in the most recent film, Joker, with Joaquin Phoenix.
Right, which I have some takes on that.
Yeah, that's the most evolution of the character that we see of all 3 films. But Nicholson's character, of course, he's basically he's a pretty well-off henchman that's working for, the character Grisham, of course, as I referenced, played by Jack Palance.
Yeah.
And so similarly with Dark Knight, again, probably not to the same degree, but I think of that opening scene, of course, with the bank heist.
Yes.
Right. And so those two performances or portrayals are similar in that sense, right? They're both sort of, in the underworld already, and they're kind of, making their bones through crime and whatnot.
Yeah, and the first one in 1989, which mimics the comics the closest, and again, there's several origin stories, but the original was that he gets dropped into a vat of acid, which you see in 1989, and that's what makes his skin all white. Before he was dropped in the acid, he had normal color skin, and at one point he made his face up with makeup, and he has to wipe off, the skin to see the white.
Yeah.
Which is an incredible effect. And I watched the extras. That was very difficult to do.
So let's stick with the origin piece, but move through the different characters. So as you point out, Nicholson's is the closest to the comics of all films. And we don't get, let's go into the Dark Knight a little bit. So when we first kind of get a sense of what made Heath Ledger's Joker who he is as the Joker, like how did he get to be like that?
And we really don't know.
We really don't know. There's a couple of scenes where in the dialogue where he's sort of talking about his relationship with his father.
Yes.
Right? But the stories change dramatically. He's talking to those, I'll just call them gangsters, but he's talking to that group of thugs that he's trying to do business with and ends up turning on them. But in that scene where he's got the guy in the little pool hall there at their club, and he's got the knife to his mouth, and he's asked, said, "Do you want to know how I I got to look like this, and start talking about, as you say, his father was a drinker, and you put a smile on that face and this and that. Then flash forward to the scene with Maggie Gyllenhaal when they first meet, and it's really a different story.
Right.
It's really about him and his, I guess, wife, I think he says. So two totally different stories that the character himself.
Right. He talks about putting razor blades in his mouth. By the way, we didn't mention this is Christopher Nolan's version of the Joker. And it's not an origin story. So he does throw in those different stories. He really kind of skips the origin story. Heath's already full-blown Joker in this. It's not like he gets dropped into acid or whatever. It starts out with, like you said, the bank robbery. We don't hear him speak all through the bank robbery.
Well, there's one line which I love where he says, no, I kill the bus driver. And that's like, I think, the only line.
Right.
Now these, if we go from Nicholson to Heath, obviously much darker, even though the original Batman and Nicholson's performance it did make that film quite a dark film at that time when it came out. And
it was literally dark. And that's how Tim Burton shoots.
Right.
Very much dark scenes.
But the characters they're more similar, certainly in terms of the look, right? With the, so not a dramatic difference there. I think it isn't until we get into this most recent iteration where it's just, entirely different. But as you say, these two weren't really origin stories. Yeah, the original Batman Joker, that was to a degree, but not as much as the most recent film with Joaquin.
Yeah, which actually Todd Phillips has talked about this. He didn't even call this Joker movie. It's more of a character study. Mm-hmm. Like, how does a guy get from normal or his normal to this total crazy psychotic kind of person? Mm-hmm. So that's it's a huge arc.
Yeah.
In the Joker. And Todd Phillips, basically nothing's from the comics. This is a completely, he just made this guy Fleck. That was the character's name, Arthur Fleck. He just made that guy up. So none of this came from, like, Nolan and Tim Burton both studied the comics before they shot.
Yeah.
I forget who his co-writer was, and I'm sorry I don't have it right.
Scott Silver, you're talking
okay,
about.
Thanks. They just made this character up, and then they kind of put him in a Joker scenario. Right. And man, did it work. Perfect. Although there is a comic series where he was a stand-up comedian. So that is what, although he says, no, this has nothing to do with, comic book, there is elements like that element.
But I think the big difference is that those two films, Batman and Dark Knight, they're much more steeped in the comic world and more in fantasy.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And that's what I find so powerful about Phoenix's depiction of Joker, is because of the realism.
It's disturbing.
Yeah, and because of the evolution of that character, the arc of the character in that film, where this is a guy who obviously suffers from mental illness. There's obviously speculation that, well, and I guess you can even say in the movie they confirm it to a degree that his mother also suffers from mental illness
Right.
and and of course going through the history of abuse and all that, all of those things led him to ultimately sort of get to the place where he was psychologically, emotionally, and even physically. Now, do you have a favorite of these three?
That it's so tough. This is we talked about this with the favorite movies when we were talking about The Godfather. It's like picking you know, your favorite child.
Right.
But I do have a favorite, and it's Heath Ledger. When you heard Jack Nicholson was going to play the Joker, everybody was like, wow, talk about typecasting. That's perfect. Although there was a whole bunch of actors looked at and talked about Warner Brothers wanted Nicholson from the start.
So what is it about Heath in particular, his
I
portrayal?
think it was so, like when I heard Heath Ledger's doing the Joker, I just kind of scratched my head. And I was like, that seems like an odd choice.
Mm-hmm.
How can he? I don't see it. But man, he brought it to life. And the same with Joaquin Phoenix, such a great actor. I remember telling you when I first found out that he was going to play, that they were going to do a movie and he was going to be the Joker. I had actually seen, the first thing they shot was a scene in the subway where he's being chased by the cops,
Mm-hmm.
and he pops into the subway and takes his mask off. And after, I don't know if you remember this, but I saw the movie before you, and I called you and I said, I think this could be another Academy Award Joker movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how good he was. And what about you? I mean, do you have a favorite or?
I do. And, for a long time, it was also Heath. Really is, as you said, it's like, how do you decide? And there are also three totally different movies.
Yeah.
But if I have to pin it down, I have to say that Joaquin's performance is just so stunning that, I mean, I just watched it last night. And, again, the emotional, physical, psychological arc that you witness from start to finish in that film is just, it's excruciating. It's difficult to watch. And,
Yeah.
Of course, anybody that's ever seen his films knows how method he is anyways, but
Well, actually, I got to interrupt you there because that's actually not true. I thought the same thing, that he was a method guy. He gets into character, but that's not true. And this comes from Todd Phillips. And it was an interview I saw with him. And Todd said, people think he's method, but as soon as he yelled cut, they'd start joking. They'd be doing this brutal scene. He'd yell cut, and they'd start joking and laughing. And he appears to be that kind of guy. And when he did he did that kind of failed experiment where he said he was quitting acting and going to be a rapper. And he actually, that was like, he went into character for that. He did method for that.
And I don't mean method in the sense that when they said cut and he just, and you had to call him by his character name or anything like that. It's just, I mean, look, you can't argue that physically, right? He lost however many pounds he lost in a very short time too.
Yes. In fact, in the extras, Todd Phillips, the director, was getting nervous because it was July. He said, Joaquin isn't fat, but he was about $180, say. They were going to be filming in a couple of months. And he said, we talked about the weight. And Joaquin said, oh, don't worry about it. And I guess he just stopped eating.
Well, yeah, he said he literally ate an apple a day all summer.
That's right. Is
what he said.
And you see him in some of those scenes with his shirt off. Not quite not quite Christian Bale, the mechanic thin, but pretty close.
And again, it's probably, it could have a lot to do with the other elements of the film too. But I mean, certainly his performance is fantastic. But there was another thing that stood out for me, which is why I say that the elements of the film just kind of, I think, lifted that performance up even more, which was, and I know this is also for those of you that have owned this film and have access to these extras that we're referring to, the score to the film.
Yeah.
And actually the woman is featured in the extras briefly. There's a segment
the cellist, right?
Yeah, and just incredible the what that cello does for, you know, the kind of the thematic element of the film. It's so equally dark and sad, and you know, all of those things just expressed through the cello. I thought that was both beautiful and then also, like I said, very dark. You know,
The one thing I will say about Joaquin Phoenix's Joker is he's very much a loose cannon.
mm-hmm.
You never know. You know, like there's a scene in the movie where he's kind of dancing. He does a lot of dancing in this movie. You know, it starts out with him doing like a shuffle. You know, he's got the sign and he's doing this little jig as a clown.
Yeah.
Then he does this operatic stuff with the music you talked about with the cellist.
Mm-hmm.
Like after he shoots the three guys in the subway, he runs off and he goes into this bathroom. You know, you'd think, hey, I got to get rid of the gun. He starts doing this weird dance. It's so fitting to this character, you know, the same way he, you know, he's on the you know, the kind of Tonight Show sort of set. Just, you know, out of nowhere, pulls out the gun, shoots him in the head. You know, I'm just going to, you know, you just don't know that's coming. You don't see it coming. The only thing that was telegraphed a little bit, and I forget the scene, I'd have to watch, you just watched it, so you might know this.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Of course, we've been spoiling them right from the jump.
Right.
And there's a certain assumption that you've seen these films we're talking about.
Correct. I meant to say that. Because,
we might have to, you know, preface that up front more.
Yeah, with the warning, but we're assuming, given that these have all been out, they're all out on 4K, and they're all worth, if you already have it, I always say don't rebuy, you know, don't double dip, but these three I would double dip. And of course the Joker came out straight, you know, first on 4K.
You know, we've got this poll running on Twitter right now. Again, that's at OB Podcast, both Twitter and Instagram, if you want to check us out there. And overwhelmingly, although the total number of votes is quite low right now, but it's clearly in favor of Joaquin Phoenix's Joker as of right now. Although
he's on his way up.
Well, here I'll point this out. There was an article in Esquire. Let's see, this was October 2019, ranking the best Joker actors from worst to best. Keep in mind, this includes, you know, the animated series and the TV as well.
Interesting.
But number one on that Esquire list is Heath Ledger from The Dark Knight. Yeah, and number two was Mark Hamill. Again, just to reference,
not surprised.
Just to call back to that. And three is Nicholson. And actually, four is Joaquin Phoenix on their list. So they actually have him last out of the three, if you look at it in that order. Yeah. Yeah, there's another ranking on the Variety website where Heath Ledger, again, number one.
Wow. So obviously I win.
Yeah, I guess so.
Bring in the card, Johnny.
But again, they're so different.
They are. It's hard to compare them.
It's really hard to compare them, you know. But
and you know, one thing I want to end with is just some of the actors considered that we could have seen
Oh, right, yeah.
as Jokers, which I thought was interesting. And Robin Williams, again, God rest his soul, and what a shame that was. But he was pretty upset because they kind of used him as like a bargaining chip.
Yes,
They
I
were
think
kind
I've
of
heard that.
they were kind of telling him, "Hey, we're going to use you as the Joker," but they were really just trying to Jack Nicholson got the best contract, I think, of all of them. So Robin Williams was one. Tim Burton's pick was actually Brad Dourif, which most people probably won't recognize that name.
Well, that is weird, but of course, Brad Dourif, who played what was the character's name in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
That's right. He played with
Billy Bibbit.
He was Billy Bibbit.
Billy Bibbit, but also he was Sheriff Brackett in
That's right, in Halloween.
My favorite horror franchise of all time, Halloween. Yeah.
Yeah, but he, famously, most people know him as Chucky.
That's right, Chucky.
He's the Chucky doll.
Yeah.
And he's done it in every single movie except the last. They just did one, and I still haven't seen it yet. But who did the voice? Mark Hamill.
That's right, Mark Hamill. You're right. Yeah, bringing it back around. Interesting.
And then Willem Dafoe was another candidate.
Now that I could see.
I could too.
Now wait, was this for the?
This is the all I'm talking about right now is 1989.
Okay.
So Willem Dafoe, Ray Liotta was talked to.
Oh, that's
about it. He just kind of said no, brushed it aside. So those were the actors in the original, or some of them. Who knows? Some of them deny it.
Yeah.
Others say, hey, they offered it to me. Chris Nolan's version with Heath, I don't know of anyone else that was considered. I do in the most recent, but do you know?
From the most recent?
No, from the Heath Ledger. I've never heard other candidates.
Okay, well, it says, and I'm going to cheat a little bit, but this is what it says on Wikipedia. Is it says before Ledger was cast in July 2006, Paul Bettany.
Oh, yes.
Who, of course, from Iron Man and, the Marvel series. Paul Bettany, is it Lacey Hume, who's an Australian actor and screenwriter, I guess, and Adrian Brody.
I did know Adrian Brody. I did know him.
Steve Carell.
That's right. I did hear that. I thought that might have been the first one, but you're right. It was, but he was like he wanted it,
But this is where Robin Williams actually publicly expressed interest in the role. It was for this one.
Oh, for Heath Ledger.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the first one. No. Are you saying Robin Williams?
Yeah, that's what it says right here.
No, because I know, well, maybe he got involved in the second, but he was definitely used as leverage.
Yeah, well, and maybe that's why he expressed interest here, because he wanted to prove that he could bring something to that character.
Like, let me show you.
Yes.
But
and those are the only ones that are listed there. But there's some interesting, like Paul Bettany and Adrian Brody. That would have been interesting.
Yeah. And Todd Phillips has said, he did the most recent Joker, said that it was definitely from the start. In fact, they did sketches and so forth, and it was always like they used Joaquin Phoenix's face, basically. Mm-hmm. He had that, him burned in his mind.
Yeah, he
to play the part.
In mind. That's right. Yeah,
and this is one thing I would say with the three of them. After Heath Ledger, I can't think of anyone else who could, and let's face it, Jared Leto sort of proved this, because Jared Leto's a pretty good actor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he is.
And has done some really good things. In fact, he won an Academy Award, didn't he, for the Dallas movie? I can't think of the
Buyers Club.
Yes, and maybe not, because
he's also number 8 on the men's health ranking of all the Jokers. So
that's pretty bad.
Jared Leto can't catch a break.
I do know who was offered his job, though.
Who's that?
There was a guy that was actually offered that gig. Mm-hmm. It was Ryan Gosling.
Okay, yeah, I could see that.
In the, and I don't blame him at all. In the DC universe, which is all screwed up right now, he and Jared Leto is signed on for the next, Suicide Squad? Is that the movie he was in?
Squad, yeah.
Yeah. So if Ryan Gosling had signed the deal, it would have been for like 3 or 4 movies. So luckily he ran in the other direction, because it would have been a career killer.
Yeah, well, I think for me, again, the way that the arc of the character is laid out in Joker is just, I think that's what brings it home for me as the best performance. But I love them all for individually. I think they all bring something very, very different to the screen. They're 3 very different films. So, but if for argument's sake, I got to stick with Joaquin Phoenix, as much as I've always loved Heath's performance in particular, because that was such a stark contrast to Nicholson's performance.
Yeah, and losing him, what a shame. Mm-hmm. Imagine the work we would have seen from him. Yeah. And of course he won, he was already gone when he won the Academy Award, which was sad.
Right. Yeah, I remember that. Posthumously got that.
And this is a good time to point out, because it's in the news sort of right now, like Martin Scorsese is thumbing his nose at these comic book movies. And, I don't think that's really fair at all. In fact, you look at his movies, and I love Martin Scorsese. Of course, he has, classics. But, a lot of the same actors, a lot of the same kind of scenes. So I don't think it's really fair for him to kind of thumb his nose at. I think it's more jealousy because they're dominating the box office. And
yeah, I mean, listen. It's at the end of the day, it's interpretation. It's to each his own. So
yeah,
that's kind of my take on that.
And I remember 1989 Batman came out. That was at a time where comic book movies weren't huge. Most people say Spider-Man was the first blockbuster because of the money it made. But really, I think, before Batman, there was Dick Tracy.
Warren Beatty,
which, the music done by Danny Elfman, which we mentioned in our last podcast. But I would have thought Jack Nicholson should have been up for an Academy Award, and probably should have won it. We'd have 3 Jokers and 3 Academy Awards.
Well, and I think, wasn't he nominated at least for not? For,
I didn't think
not
so.
For an Oscar, but wasn't he? I mean, it was well received by the critics.
It was.
I mean, again, even though they were, there were some feelings that it was, too dark. I know with some of the criticism at the time.
At one time, the comics had, like a ratings code, like they do with movies, PG, R, etc. The Joker was always, they always had to tame him down because the comics would get a little bit too aggressive or whatever, so they'd have to get a rating to get it out there. And there was actually a Joker comic book, but it only lasted like 16 issues, I think it was total.
It's interesting. The American Film Institute in June of 2003, put out a list of 100 heroes and villains, and they sort of ranked, the top 50 heroes and the top 50 villains.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Batman is number 46 on the hero list, so he's way down towards the bottom. And
is it just generic Batman, or is it specifically Michael Keaton's?
It's specific to Keaton, correct?
Okay.
And the villain, or on the villains list, Joker comes in at number 45.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's kind of interesting. They're almost similarly ranked on the same list from the same film. That's kind of wild.
That is funny. And we could do a Batman one of these too and go through the different Batman actors, but everyone was shocked when Michael Keaton, all the comic book people were furious, but he turned out to be fantastic.
So let's look again, talk, before we wrap up, let's look back at the looks of these three characters and identify some of the similarities, some of the differences and things. And what are your thoughts as you look at the three of them? What stands out?
To me, one of the things that stands out is the green hair. They all have green hair from different ways, one from the acid. We don't know about Heath Ledger. We do know that Joaquin, put it in himself. There's a scene where he's kind of dancing again. They all have, similar suits to even Cesar Romero. I think that's kind of a wink to him.
Yeah,
the purple.
They're very similar.
Yeah.
It's just really from the suits, the departure. And then again, Todd Phillips talks about it, but they kind of went away from the purple suit, and of course he's got that. It's more, I guess, red, you'd say.
And Nicholson, I knew they flew him to London like 3 times to outfit him in these suits. These are expensive suits that they're wearing in these movies, and I do. And even in the second one, Heath Ledger, it's referenced. He's wearing a designer suit with the labels cut out. That's kind of an interesting thing that they don't address. Where do they get the money for all these things,
The suits, you mean?
Well, yeah, for their clothes, their contraptions. Like, Nicholson had the buzzer. I know in the comics, Nicholson's, not Nicholson, but the Joker's character was kind of a scientist and worked with chemicals and whatnot. But I guess they were criminals, so I guess that's where they get their money.
Yeah, robbing banks and
that kind of stuff.
Organized crime.
But they all have, similar grins, right? But they do it in different ways. Mm-hmm. But they all get to that same grin. I thought Joaquin Phoenix at the very end, where he makes the grin with the blood.
Yeah, that was intense.
And he kind of pushes his smile to the limit. That was, pretty unbelievable. But, in the end, I think we have a link. There is a link to all three, and you could find similarities.
Are they going to do another one? And if they do, who's going to be up for that role? I mean,
like right now as we speak, there is a new Batman being filmed, although it's in hiatus because of what's going on with this virus that we're dealing with at the current time.
Well, we said that about Heath Ledger's performance, that, nobody could possibly bring something new to the character, et cetera. And then, of course, Joaquin Phoenix does his stellar performance. So, if anything, it would just be intriguing to see how someone else might bring another dimension to the character.
Do you think if Heath Ledger hadn't died, we would have saw him in the third part of the trilogy by Christopher Nolan?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'm not sure. I think it might have still been a one and done, and Nolan just
Yeah.
introducing some new characters in the third, new villains. But yeah, who's to say? I don't know. I would have certainly loved to have seen that if that were possible. But
Because we know he didn't die. He's just kind of dangling there at the end. We assume in the first one that Nicholson is dead because he, took a fall from the biggest building in Gotham.
yeah, interesting similarity there between those two.
I assume we're going to see another Joker with Joaquin Phoenix and Todd Phillips. I just believe that will happen. But in the Batman universe, in the DC universe, which even though the Joker is under that banner, he doesn't consider it part of that universe. So I think we'll see that still go on its own. But do we see who can step up to the plate and give us something new?
Well, no matter what your preference, these are three iconic performances of the same character. I love them all. Again, as I said before, for different reasons. So it's not really, I couldn't really say this one's better than the other. I don't even think that's fair to the actress' performances. They were just so good in three very different films, but just wonderful portrayals of the same character. So I would love to think that we might get a fourth iteration here in the not too distant future. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some actors out there that have ideas on how they would do it. But what do you think? What do you guys think? Hopefully the listeners have, thoughts on who would you like to see play the next Joker, or who do you love? I mean, you like me and you're a Heath guy, or you like
Hubba, who do you trust?
Yeah.
So if you guys want to share, we'd love to get your feedback, and not only about this, but about anything film related, maybe some topics that you might want us to focus on for future episodes. But you can always reach out to us on social media at OB Podcast. You can hit us up with an email at obpodcast@gmail.com. You can drop us a voicemail at 407-476-8781. And we may even feature your emails or voicemails on a future episode of Oh Brother Podcast. But I've enjoyed talking about this character, these three different performances. I love them all. It was a nice excuse to pull them all out and rewatch them again. And
I do like them all as well, minus one. And I would. I'm really curious if we'll get. If you don't agree with us, tell us we're full of crap.
Absolutely, we'll take criticism too.
Leave that in the comments as well.
Your pick is Heath. Mine's Joaquin Phoenix. So far, from those that have responded to the poll we've got out there on Twitter, it's Joaquin Phoenix. But there's a couple days left as of us recording this podcast, so who knows where it's going to end up. I will publish the results of that poll on our social media channels as well, just in case you're interested. But so we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we look forward to having you join us for our next episode. And we're bringing you weekly episodes about all things film. And for now, I've been your host, Dan Smith, along with my brother,
Mike Smith.
And this has been the Oh Brother Podcast. We'll see you soon.